Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I am seeing on my social media feeds some articles about going to hell because of this and that. One particular issue is a hot Christian topic: divorce. So I looked and found an article that John wrote several years ago. I will read it to you. Please be patient, that sometimes it is best read, not spoken, but for the purpose of insights and podcast discussion, I'd love to share a very important topic that might be of help to some people. Here it goes. Is divorce an unforgivable sin? Of course not, most Christians would say. However, in the minds of many Christians, it certainly has a one strike and you're out stigma attached to it. Divorcees often feel they have a second class status in the congregation and are to suffer even greater congregational judgment if they remarry. It is without exaggeration that they feel they are branded with a large scarlet D, which they must try to either bravely bear or deceivingly hide. The church which harbors these feelings quote the teachings of Jesus and to a lesser extent Paul to validate their attitudes. However, we must be very, very careful with our understanding of these words and writings. Divorce itself cannot possibly be considered a sin because it was allowed to be done by Moses. It was not prohibited, but tolerated. Why? It is generally accepted that the many laws given by Moses, dietary, behavioral, financial, religious, etc., were given as means to protect and even to strengthen the community, which faced many perilous times during its sojourn in the desert. The Sabbath was to rest the body, land, and soul, as well as to learn to rest and turn things over to God, a precursor to grace. The year of Jubilee, to invigorate the economy and renew the opportunities and dignity for previously indentured workers. The dietary laws to protect the health of the community as well as to maintain respect towards the author of life, etc. We must assume that divorce was allowed by Moses as a means of strengthening the community and did not compromise the holiness of God. The part of the community which would be protected by divorce, of course, is the family. Jesus hints at that when he states that Moses was attempting to deal with the hardness of heart of the people. When this hardness of heart leads to violence, adultery, other forms of abuse, or abandonment, then it is destroying the family in direct opposition of what marriage was supposed to be and supposed to do. By now, many readers have either quit reading this article in disgust or quit reading it because their anger and indignation has raised their blood pressure to dangerously high levels. However, for those who are still reading, if any, I just want to remind you that our holy, perfect God also refers to himself as using a bill of divorce, Jeremiah 3:8, Isaiah 51, to separate himself from an adulterous, non-believing spouse. He did this because a holy God could not remain in such a relationship. Therefore, it is not the divorce which is the sin, because God cannot sin, but rather it is the lies, deception, etc., which the sins that cause the divorce. The divorce is merely a public statement of the lies, abuse, abandonment, etc., which can no longer be tolerated. Compare this with abused, beaten, greatly suffering spouses who remain in terribly unholy, ungodly relationships because they have been taught to divorce. The spouse would be offensive to God. God hates divorce. Is this a contradiction? Does God do the very thing which he hates? Remember that Jesus states the reason that Moses granted divorce was due to the hardness of heart of one or both spouses. The hardness of heart is the sin. That is what God hates. That is what God had to separate himself from when he divorced idolatrous Israel. A divorce is an official statement that sin has destroyed a marital relationship. In itself, it is a neutral legal statement. It is like a death certificate. To continue in a dead marriage can be as harmful as Norman Bates' continued relationship with his dead mother in the Alfred Hitchcock movie Psycho. The next question is a little more complicated. Biblically, can a divorced person remarry? According to Moses, it certainly was not a problem. It was not considered a sin. The only restriction was a person could not marry someone whom they had previously divorced. Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 3. Please understand that the various laws of Moses would not direct someone into sinning. Remarriage was part of the law of Moses. One possible reason for that was Genesis 2:18, when God states that it is not good for man to be alone. Jesus reinforces this strong drive put into man and woman by their Creator when he states that it is only rare cases that people are able to live celibate lives in a holy way. Matthew 19:10-12. Paul also mentions this inherent attraction between male and female in 1 Corinthians 7:9. It was because of this strong, necessary emotional and physical attraction between male and female that Moses allowed remarriage. Otherwise, the familial problems which caused the divorce would show themselves in other ways. The new covenant was introduced in John 2:1-10 by means of the miracle at the wedding feast. Paul also refers to the new covenant in a marriage context in Ephesians 5:31-32. It might be correct to state that God are married through his salvation offered to the Gentiles in the new covenant, a new marriage and a new covenant based on grace, not on law. John 1:17. Jesus very clearly speaks against remarriage in most cases. How can we reconcile his words with the realities of the previous two paragraphs? It is helpful to consider the context of Jesus' words. It is in the context of being holy, as God is holy. Matthew 5:48. If we want to be consistent by taking Jesus' words literally in Matthew 5:48, then we must be prepared to be sent to hell for a derogatory word or flash of anger. Matthew 5:21-22. Jesus equates those momentary failings to murder. We must be prepared to gouge out our eyes and cut off our right hand. Perhaps we have to be more consistent in our interpretations of the scriptures. We say that we don't live under the law, but under God's grace, and therefore are free from hell, gouging of eyes, cutting off of hands because of the blood of Jesus. Well, perhaps the blood of Jesus also covers the holiness demanded of those people divorced, just as it did the people and their sins mentioned above. We are spared lives of living with maimed limbs and missing eyes, due not to our righteousness, but to God's grace. Perhaps those in divorce relationships are spared, some through remarriage, from living in suppression of those strong drives placed in us by the Creator. It is really dangerous to say that certain verses are literal and others are symbolic when the verses are in the same chapter and are in the same literary genre. Hopefully, this article will cause some to consider the teaching of divorce and remarriage in the scriptures in their entirety. So there you have it. Thank you for listening. This article may serve as a precursor to my upcoming podcast episode, not the next, but the one I am still working on, which is 2 of 2. That is episode 6, Harsh Heavy, I hope you can join me in the next episode of Lilies and Ravens podcast. God bless.